He had been doing this for many years, and he was good at it. Not good in the way the department meant, when it talked about clearance rates and community relations, and the kind of policing that built something lasting on both sides of a badge. Good in the way a trap is good, efficient, patient, reliable. Officer Vance Pruitt knew his territory, the way a landlord knows a property. He had long stopped maintaining it, not with pride, but with possession. The Harrove district belonged to him in every way that mattered on an overnight shift. The streets, the corners, the invisible lines only he could see. He had spent many years drawing those lines, and he had spent many years making sure other people stayed inside them. Tonight, like most nights, he was parked at the dead end of a service lane behind the reliable bail bonds billboard on the east side of Keller Avenue. His cruiser sat dark, headlights off, parking lights on, amber exhaust curling white against the cold November air. Beside him, Rookie Officer Sawyer Briggs was 2 sips into a gas station coffee and several weeks into understanding that riding with Vance Pruitt meant learning things the Academy had not taught, and probably never intended to. Pruitt was watching the street the way a cat watches a bird feeder. Still, unhurried, absolute in his patience. What he could not have known sitting in that service lane in that cruiser was that by sunrise he would be in handcuffs. That within a week his face would be the most watched face on 4 news networks. That within 6 months a federal judge would hand down a substantial sentence and strip every financial benefit he had spent many years accruing, transferring it all, every dollar of it, to the 6 people whose lives he had manufactured charges against and whose names he had never once thought about after the paperwork was filed. And it was going to happen because of a woman in a gray hoodie going to buy ibuprofen. What he could not have known, what he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand and never fully managing to, was that the woman in the gray hoodie was not a civilian, not a random target, not anyone he could process through the machinery he had been running for many years without consequence. She was the consequence. She had been assigned to him by the State Police Bureau specifically because precincts like his did not fix themselves, and she had spent many years building the kind of career that existed for precisely this purpose. Her name was Captain Nora Caldwell. She was his new commanding officer. Her official start time was that morning. She had arrived a full day early, and what she was going to say to him in front of the officers in that building, what she was going to do with his own signed report in her own left hand, would end not just his career, but everything he had ever believed about who was untouchable and who was not. He was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the end of his shift. That was the last comfortable thought Vance Pruitt would ever have. The apartment above the hardware store on Meridian Street smelled like fresh paint and someone else's decisions. Nora Caldwell had moved into several apartments over the years, all of them like this one, temporary, functional, bare of anything that required unpacking beyond what she would need for the length of the assignment. She had learned somewhere along the way to stop noticing the impermanence. You put your badge on the kitchen counter, your service weapon on the nightstand, and one framed photograph on whatever surface was closest to where you would wake up in the morning. For Nora, the photograph was her mother, Eleanor Caldwell, a retired school librarian from Akron, who had told her daughter on the day she made investigator that the only thing more dangerous than a corrupt cop was a patient one, and who had meant it simultaneously as a warning and as a description of her own daughter. Nora had been in Harrove for several hours. Most of those hours had been spent hauling cardboard boxes up a staircase that turned too sharply at the top, in a building that held the cold, the way concrete always does, indiscriminately, without apology. The remaining time had been spent on the floor with her laptop balanced on her knees, answering a backlog of bureau emails on a connection that dropped frequently, with a headache that had been building since she crossed the city limits that day. The previous assignment had closed recently, many months on a detective who had been running a false evidence operation so long he had begun to believe his own paperwork. The case ended with a guilty plea and a federal sentence, and the drive home through flat Ohio farmland had given her too much time to think. She had thought about the 6 people whose convictions were being vacated. She had thought about whether she had enough left in her to do this again. The Harrove assignment answered that question, the way the Bureau always answered it, not by asking, but by assigning. Harrow District PD, mid-sized city east side, a corruption probe that had produced no indictments on a technicality, several officer resignations, 2 more under review, a union that had circled its wagons so completely the wagons had become the precinct, a few months under an acting commander with neither the stomach nor the authority to change anything. The Bureau's directive was 4 words: fix it or close it. She had chosen to arrive a day early because she had learned at every previous assignment that a precinct's true character lived in its overnight hours, in the behavior of its officers when they believed the only eyes on them were each other's. She had planned to make 3 quiet loops through the patrol sector and come back with notes. She had not planned for the headache to peak late at night with a throbbing behind her left eye that made reading the screen physically painful. She had not packed ibuprofen. There was a 24-hour pharmacy nearby, a quick errand. She stood up from the floor, pulled a gray hoodie over her head because the apartment was cold near the windows, picked up the rental car keys and her wallet. The wallet was not an ordinary wallet. Behind her driver's license, pressed flat against the inner leather, was a silver captain's shield engraved with the words, Captain Harrow, District State Police Bureau. She did not take it out. That morning, it would go on her uniform. Tonight, it was just a piece of metal, in a piece of leather, riding in her back pocket. The rental car the Bureau's fleet division had assigned her looked from the outside like a standard black luxury sedan. That was the point. In reality, it carried a 360-degree high-definition camera system, exterior and interior, including a pinhole lens mounted flush in the ceiling console, uploading every frame to a secure state server in real time. Nora had been driving it for some time. It had recorded her grocery store, her dry cleaner, her mother's driveway on Thanksgiving. It had also provided the footage that made the previous case airtight. She backed out of the parking space. She did not see the cruiser in the service lane behind the bail bonds billboard, but she clocked it the moment it pulled out behind her, because many years of internal affairs work had trained her to recognize the angle of a trailing patrol car, the way a surgeon recognizes the angle of a blade. She did not panic. She maintained the speed limit to the mile. She signaled every turn. She came to a full stop at the intersection of Keller and Monroe. She did everything a reasonable officer would require. She did it because she was professional, and because some part of her that had been doing this work for many years had already begun to understand with a cold and patient clarity that the officer behind her was not going to be reasonable. The light bar came on a couple blocks from the pharmacy. She tapped the blinker. She glided to the curb. She shifted into park, killed the engine, placed both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. Vance Pruitt was middle-aged and had been with Harrow District PD since he was young, and in that time, the department had given him exactly nothing he had asked for. He had asked for the detective track multiple times and been passed over. He had failed the lieutenant's exam twice. The official reason was his complaint file, the thickest in the building by some margin. His own explanation was simpler and more satisfying. The department didn't recognize real police work because real police work was uncomfortable to look at. Real police work got results that oversight boards and sensitivity training instructors didn't want to credit. This was the story he told himself. He had told it so many times it had achieved the status of personal history. He kept his cruiser immaculate, his service weapon cleaned regularly. He pressed his own uniform shirts because he did not trust the precinct's laundry contract to get the creases right. In the things he could control, equipment, appearance, the personal space he maintained around himself in every room, he exercised a precision that would have looked to an outside observer almost like discipline. In the things he could not control, he had found a different kind of compensation. The inner pocket of his tactical vest had a Velcro closure and a flat interior approximately 3 inches wide. He had modified the vest himself. Inside it on most overnight shifts was a small Ziploc bag containing approximately 1 gram of white powder that field-tested positive for cocaine. He had used it several times over the years. Each time he had chosen his target with the same criteria: black or Latino, alone after midnight, driving a car that signaled money they were not supposed to have on his patch without visible justification. And each time the person he had chosen had been, in every sense he found useful, unable to fight back. No attorney who understood chain of custody, no name that reached the deputy chief's level, no standing. He had never been challenged. He had never been investigated. He had, in the formulation that Sergeant Beckett used on the rare occasions when Pruitt pushed too far, been managed. Sawyer Briggs was young and had been out of the academy for several months. He had believed when he graduated most of what they taught him, the oath, the Constitution, the idea that the uniform meant something you had to earn every day. Several weeks with Vance Pruitt had not destroyed that belief, but it had put significant structural pressure on it. He knew about the inner pocket. He had seen Pruitt's hand go to it before on previous stops. Both times the stop had ended with an arrest and a found object charge and a defendant who did not, as far as Briggs could determine, have the resources to dispute what the report said. He had not reported it. He told himself he wasn't certain enough. He told himself a rookie complaint against a veteran would disappear. These things were not entirely untrue, but they were not the whole truth. The whole truth was that he was afraid, and fear, when it disguises itself as caution, can wear that disguise for a long time before the mirror shows you what it actually is. Pruitt spotted the rental plates, ran them, came back clean, and pulled out of the lane. Anyway, his eyes had caught the driver's side profile through the windshield. Dark-skinned, hood up, alone at midnight, rental car. And the calculation ran in him the way a reflex runs below the level of conscious thought, below the level of anything that could be examined. "Red flag," he said, putting the cruiser in gear. Briggs shifted in his seat. He did not say anything. He had learned early that saying anything cost more than it was worth. He would think about that for a long time afterward. Nora watched Pruitt's approach in the side mirror as he came up on the passenger side, deliberately off her sight line, which was the point. His mag light was already on, aimed at her face, too bright and too close. She didn't flinch. Her hands stayed at 10 and 2. Her eyes tracked him without her head moving. He rapped the glass with his knuckles hard, 3 times. No greeting, no identification, no reason for the stop. She lowered the window. License, registration, proof of insurance. She slid the sunglasses off her face. She was still wearing them, not for appearance, but for the migraine light sensitivity that had been with her for hours, and set them on the dashboard. She reached for the glove box with slow, deliberate movements, the kind a person makes when she has studied what happens to people who move quickly in front of officers like this one. She handed over the rental agreement, the insurance card, and her driver's license. She did not hand over the shield. He took the documents without acknowledgement. He looked at the rental agreement, his lips moving faintly. Everything was in order. Everything matched. He knew it. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" Her voice was even, measured, unhurried. It was the voice of someone who had been in this situation before and had decided at some point in her adult life that she was never going to be the one who broke first. Pruitt's jaw tightened. He did not like the voice. He would not have been able to say precisely what he didn't like about it. But the honest answer was that it sounded educated and unafraid. And that particular combination had always produced in him a hot tightening in the chest that he experienced as his authority being challenged, when it was in fact simply the absence of the deference he had decided he was owed. "You swerved across the double yellow back on Keller." "I did not swerve, officer. I'm telling you that you swerved." "I understand. I would like it noted that I disagree." He clicked the mag light off, clicked it back on into her face. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No, sir." "Any medications?" "Ibuprofen. I haven't taken any yet. That's where I was going. The pharmacy on Keller." He looked at the out-of-state license. "Where's home?" "I moved in today." A pause. Then the word "convenient" dropped between them like something placed there on purpose. She didn't answer it. A loaded word left unanswered does more damage to the person who said it than any reply could. Behind the cruiser, Briggs had moved up to the rear passenger corner of the sedan. His hand was nowhere near his weapon. He glanced at the paperwork Pruitt was holding. Everything clean. He looked at Pruitt. He looked at his own boots. "Her papers are good, Vance." Pruitt didn't answer him. "Vance, I heard you." The tone said, "Say it again, and I'll remember it." Nora met Briggs's eyes for exactly 1 second through the glass. She registered him the way she registered every witness in every case she had ever built. Age, position. The specific quality of a person who knows something is wrong and has not yet found the part of himself that will act on it. She cataloged him. Then she looked back at Pruitt and stayed there. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." A beat. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I smell marijuana." The lie arrived naked. The autumn air smelled of wet leaves, cold asphalt, and wood smoke from a chimney down the block. There was no marijuana within a quarter mile of that car, and everyone present knew it. Behind the cruiser door, Briggs's weight shifted. He said nothing. Nora unbuckled. She stepped out slowly, both hands visible, and closed the door behind her. She was nearly Pruitt's height, and she stood the way a person stands who has spent years refusing to make herself smaller for anyone. She uncrossed her arms and rested her hands loosely at her sides, because she knew crossed arms would be called resistance in the report, and she intended to give that report no room at all. "Go stand by the trunk." She went. Pruitt leaned into the car. He made the search a performance. Center console, rifled floor mats, lifted owner's manual, flipped upside down on its return to the glove box. He was building documentation around a conclusion he had already reached. He found nothing because there was nothing to find, and the frustration of that crossed a line he had crossed several times before. He turned his back to Nora and Briggs. His right hand went to the Velcro closure on the inner vest pocket. His fingers found the small Ziploc bag. He palmed it. He bent into the driver's compartment, body blocking the street angle, and in one practice motion he set the bag on the floorboard, and in the next motion picked it back up. He did not know about the pinhole lens in the ceiling console. He did not know that the ceiling of that car had been recording in high definition. He did not know that the lens caught his hand going into the pocket, the bag coming out, and the bag leaving his fingers above the floorboard in a sequence that a forensic analyst would later describe in federal court as unambiguous and unchallengeable. He stood up. He held the bag in the maglite beam between his thumb and forefinger. "Well," the grin came before the words, "looks like somebody's evening just got a lot more complicated." Nora looked at the bag, then at his badge number, then at his name tag. Her voice dropped 1 register. Not louder, not harder, just lower and more precise, the way temperature drops before a storm arrives. "Officer Pruitt, badge number 147. You are claiming you found that in my vehicle." "That is exactly what I'm claiming." "I would like that noted on the record as well." "Note whatever you want." He unclipped his cuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." She turned. She placed her hands behind her back. She did not argue, did not protest, did not do a single thing that would give him one extra word to put in the report. And in the moment the steel went cold around her wrists, she made the decision she had been moving toward, to let this go all the way to its destination. Let him write the report. Let him book her. Let him lock the cell. Let the lie travel up the chain in writing until it landed in the inbox of the commanding officer's office, because in the morning, the commanding officer was going to walk in and read it herself. Pruitt marched her to the cruiser. He put one hand on the back of her neck and guided her into the back seat with more force than the situation required, more force than any procedure permitted, his thumb pressing hard against the base of her skull. She stumbled at the door, her shoulder catching the frame, the jolt of it sharp and deliberate and unnecessary in every way that mattered. She caught herself. She did not cry out. He laughed, the same laugh she had heard at the trunk, genuine and ugly, performed for Briggs' benefit. "Watch your steps, sweetheart." She straightened. She turned to face him through the open door. and her voice was very quiet. "Officer Pruitt, I won't be needing much sleep tonight, but I would strongly suggest you start calling every union representative you've ever met, starting right now." He rolled his eyes. He closed the door. As the car pulled away, Nora heard him say to Briggs without looking back, "That is how you trust your gut, rookie." Briggs did not answer. Pruitt walked Nora through the hair of District PD's back intake bay, with his hand wrapped around her upper arm above the cuff line, gripping harder than the walk required, steering her toward the booking desk in the particular way of a man who wants the room to see him arrive with something. The overnight booking room was fluorescent lit and stale-smelling, every surface carrying the particular institutional residue of a building that processed human misfortune regularly and cleaned infrequently. Several officers at the far end were processing a DUI. A plainclothes detective ate a sandwich at the coffee station. Behind the elevated counter sat Sergeant Roy Beckett, a veteran with many years on the job, with the face of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything long ago. "Roy!" Pruitt's voice was loud enough to carry. "Got you something." Beckett looked up. He took the arrest paperwork from Pruitt's extended hand. "What did you bring me?" "Rolling through the East Sector alone at midnight in a rented luxury." Pruitt's delivery was practiced, almost casual, the rhythm of a story told before. Plate came back clean, but the driver had every kind of suspicious about her. Searched the car, found a ball of coke under the driver's seat, pitched a fit from the minute I lit her up. He glanced at Nora. "Think she's royalty." Nora said nothing. She stood where Pruitt had placed her, 2 steps in front of the counter, hands still cuffed behind her back. She looked at Beckett. She looked at the detective. She looked at the DUI officers at the far end. She was building the chain of custody in her mind, cataloging every face in this room, every person who would become a witness to an arrest that was going to be examined frame by frame in a federal courtroom. Beckett began the intake form. Name, she gave it. Address, she gave the Meridian Street apartment, her new Harrove address, not the out-of-state one on the license. Date of birth, she gave it. Occupation, a small pause, long enough to register. Civil servant, Nora said. Pruitt laughed, a real laugh from the gut, too loud for the room. He turned toward the detective at the coffee station, looking for an audience. Civil servant. He shook his head. You stamp envelopes at the DMV, sweetheart. File tax forms. Sit in a cubicle. He stepped closer, dropping his voice into something he intended as intimidating. You know what the difference is between you and every other person I've put in a cell tonight? Not a single thing. You all look the same from where I'm standing. You always have. The detective stopped chewing. One of the DUI officers looked up. Nora held still. She did not blink. She filed the sentence the way she filed everything. Precisely. Permanently. With the particular attention of someone who understood that words spoken in front of witnesses become evidence the moment they leave the mouth. Those words were going to travel. She was going to make sure of it. Beckett looked up from the keyboard. He looked at Nora for a beat longer than standard intake practice required. Something about her bothered him, the quality of her stillness, the specific composure of a person who was not afraid. He put the toothpick back in the corner of his mouth and kept typing. Personal effects. Pruitt emptied her pockets onto the counter. Phone, keys, hair tie, wallet. Beckett picked up the wallet. He flipped it to the driver's license, confirmed the name, closed it. He did not open the inner flap. Behind the license, pressed flat against the leather, a silver captain's shield sat in the dark and waited. He bagged the wallet, sealed it, tagged it, slid it into the property locker. The slot clicked shut. Beckett hesitated just a fraction, barely perceptible. The pause of a man who has processed enough of Pruitt's paperwork to recognize the pattern, and who has spent many years choosing in moments like this one not to look directly at what the pattern meant. He opened his mouth. Ma'am, if you want to... She doesn't want anything, Pruitt said, loud and cheerful. Put her in 4. Let her sit with the overnight regulars till morning. She can call her civil servant friends from the payphone. Beckett closed his mouth. He typed. In the corridor behind the booking desk, the iron door of holding cell 4 swung open. Pruitt walked her down personally. He had always been the one who closed the door. His hand moved to the back of her neck for the second time that night. Higher this time, fingers pressing into the base of her skull, steering her through the threshold with force that had no procedural justification, and every personal one. She stumbled on the uneven concrete, her shoulder catching the metal bunk. The impact sharp and deliberate. A hiss of pain escaped before she controlled it. Pruitt laughed again, louder this time, the sound bouncing off the cinder block walls of the corridor. Easy there, sweetheart. These floors are unforgiving. He took a small step back and looked at her, savoring something. Get some rest. You're going to need it. She turned to face him through the bars. The expression on her face was the same expression it had held on Keller Avenue. The complete, deliberate absence of fear that he experienced as provocation, because he had never learned to read it as anything else. Her voice was very quiet. Officer Pruitt, I won't be needing much sleep, but I'd suggest you start calling every union representative you've ever met tonight. All of them. He rolled his eyes. His boots echoed back down the corridor. The fluorescent hum took over. She was alone. She walked to the metal bunk. She sat down, feet flat on the concrete, back straight, hands loose on her thighs. She looked at the opposite wall. She was not afraid. She was not defeated. She was running the sequence one more time, checking it for failure points the way a structural engineer checks load-bearing walls. The ceiling camera in the rental, the pinhole lens that had caught the vest pocket, the angle of Pruitt's back, the specific frame where the bag crossed the air between his hand and the floorboard, the booking room witnesses. Beckett's hesitation that became a choice. Briggs a few feet from the plant, facing the right direction, who had seen every second and said nothing, and whose silence was its own kind of evidence. And the report that Pruitt was going to write that night in his own hand, with his own signature, and walk down to the commanding officer's inbox. The report that she was going to read in the morning as his commanding officer. She let the fury sit where it had been since the moment she watched Pruitt's hand go into that vest pocket. She did not feed it, and she did not fight it. She simply observed it the way she had learned to observe a hostile witness, noting it, letting it inform her, refusing to let it make decisions for her. The fury was not about that night. Not entirely. It was about the 6 people in the briefing files she had read. 6 people who had sat on a version of this concrete bench. 6 people who had not had a silver shield in their wallet. 6 people whose convictions were being vacated because of patterns that had continued for years, because nobody in that precinct had ever been made to stop. Those people were the fury. Those people were why she was going to sit on this bench without making a single phone call, without touching that badge, without doing a single thing to interrupt the process that Pruitt was about to complete for her in writing with his name at the bottom. Patience in a case like this one was not a virtue. It was the weapon. Pruitt poured a cup of the stale and scalding coffee, which he considered a mark of character, and settled at his terminal with the satisfaction of a man who has had a good night and intends to formalize it. He wrote the report shortly. A lane departure at the block of Keller Avenue. The sedan crossing the center line by approximately 2 feet, providing probable cause for the stop. The strong odor of burnt marijuana from the open driver's window. A driver described as agitated and non-compliant. A baggie of white powdery substance field, tested positive for cocaine, observed in plain view on the floorboard of the driver's compartment, visible during a lawful search incident to probable cause. None of it had happened. All of it was signed. He printed it, picked it up, and walked it down the hall to the commanding officer's office. The office had been dark for some time. He had walked past it many times without reading the nameplate because empty desks didn't require reading. That night, as he slid the report through the inbox slot and turned to go, the desk lamp someone had plugged in that day caught the nameplate on the edge of his peripheral vision. He stopped. He read it through the glass panel on the door. Captain D. Caldwell, Harrow District PD. He read it the way you read a street sign you've driven past many times. The letters registered. No meaning connected. He said the name once under his breath. Caldwell. The unconscious reflex of a man who reads things aloud without intending to. Then he walked back to his desk. In the hallway, not far from the office door, Sawyer Briggs had stopped moving. He had been heading to the bathroom. He had stopped the moment he saw Pruitt reading the nameplate, and he stood pressed against the wall, watching Pruitt's face in profile. The reading, the subvocal repetition, the face registering nothing and turning away. Briggs stood against that wall for some time after Pruitt's footsteps faded. The name on the nameplate was the same name on the top line of the arrest form he had watched Pruitt fill out. The same name on the intake form Beckett had typed. The same name on the woman sitting in cell 4 right then, with Pruitt's cuff marks still on her wrists. He went back to his desk. He sat down. He stared at the blank screen. He did not type a single word in the next couple hours, and every few minutes he looked at the corridor that led to the cell block, and he tried to decide whether he was going to be able to look at himself in the mirror the next morning. He already knew the answer. He just hadn't admitted it yet. Across the street from where the stop had occurred, Gil Baxter had woken up when the police light bar strobed across his bedroom ceiling. He was elderly, a former school bus driver, a bad sleeper since his wife passed years ago. He had crossed to the window, parted the curtain with one finger, and seen a uniformed officer leaning into a sedan at the curb, while a driver with her hands on the wheel looked straight ahead. Gil had watched this block change over many years. He knew every car that belonged on Keller Avenue at midnight and every car that did not. What he did not know was whose car that was, but the driver had her hands where they were supposed to be, and the officer did not look like an officer having a reasonable conversation. He steadied his phone against the window frame and began filming. His angle was better than he realized. The service lamp on the corner cast enough light to catch the vest pocket opening. His phone held still long enough to record the hand going in, the bag coming out, and the specific geometry of Pruitt's arm as the bag traveled from his palm to the floorboard of the rental car. Seconds of footage that a forensic analyst would later expand frame by frame into the cleanest evidence a federal prosecutor could ask for. After the cruiser pulled away, Gil sat on the edge of his bed with the phone in his hand for some time. Then he opened the email account he used for church business and composed 2 sentences to an address he had held onto for years without ever using. The address belonged to a former parishioner named Claudia Morris, who had moved to Columbus and spent the years since becoming a civil rights attorney. He attached the video. He hit send. He went to bed. For the first time in years, he fell asleep without difficulty. Early that morning, Claudia Morris's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She sat up, put on her reading glasses, and watched Gil's footage in the dark. She watched it twice. Then she picked up a pen and wrote a name on the notepad she kept for this purpose. Victor Beckford, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Columbus Field Office, Civil Rights Division. She called him early in the morning. Victor Beckford answered on the second ring. He watched the video Claudia sent him without saying a word. When it finished, he was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Claudia, that vest pocket is going to be the most expensive zipper in the history of Ohio criminal law. I'll have a federal warrant application on a magistrate's desk before long." He hung up. He was already at his laptop. Outside in the world, Gil's footage was moving the way these things move in the digital age. Not with a single dramatic leap, but in a series of handoffs, each one carrying it further. A neighborhood watch page, a police accountability forum with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, a weekend news producer who monitored that forum, flagging it to his morning reporter with the words, "This looks real." Inside cell 4, Nora was not sleeping. She was running the sequence one more time. The camera, Gil's second-floor window she had clocked at the time of the stop and filed away, Briggs' position during the plant, the report already sitting in her inbox downstairs. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, to wait. The trap was closing. She could feel it closing. And she was going to sit on this bench under this hum for some time, because a case like this one had to close completely. Every link in the chain, every signature in place, every lie committed to paper before the paper was turned over to the people whose job it was to read what it actually said. That morning, Deputy Chief Elias Grant walked into the Harrow District briefing room behind Lieutenant Sheila Granger, and the room knew immediately that this was not a routine introduction. Grant had come up through internal affairs. He had closed several precincts before this one. He did not appear at morning briefings unless someone was about to have the worst day of their career. His face was pulled tight. His eyes moved across the seated officers in a slow, horizontal sweep that the room recognized as something between inventory and threat assessment. The chatter stopped before Lieutenant Granger called attention. The officers stood. Pruitt took his boots off the chair in front of him with a slight delay, the small, habitual performance of indifference that had served him for many years and would cost him in the next few minutes in ways he could not yet calculate. At ease. They sat. Grant gripped the edges of the podium. He looked at the room before he spoke, and the look was not friendly. I am here this morning for a specific reason. This precinct has operated without a permanent commanding officer for some time. That ends today. The Bureau has assigned a new captain to Harrow District effective this morning. A pause long enough to mean something. She was scheduled to be here this morning to review overnight logs before the introduction. She has not arrived. Her phone is going to voicemail. Lieutenant Granger's office confirmed with the Bureau emergency line that the new CO landed in Harrow yesterday afternoon. Her car was checked out of the fleet lot in Columbus days ago. Another pause. If anyone in this room has had contact with Captain Nora Caldwell in the last several hours, I need to know about it now. The room held the specific silence that follows a statement which retroactively changes the meaning of everything that preceded it. At the back of the room, Sergeant Roy Beckett went as still as a man who has just heard a sound he cannot identify, but whose implications he can already feel arriving in his chest. He was holding the overnight arrest manifest on his clipboard, the intake form on top, the name he had typed himself hours ago visible without looking at it, because he had been looking at it in his peripheral vision. The clipboard clipped once, twice against his leg before he could still his hands. In the second row, Pruitt's brain performed a connection that his conscious arrogance had been preventing since the hallway outside the CO's office. The name from Grant's mouth. The nameplate he had read in the dark and let slide past. The name field on the top line of the report sitting in the commanding officer's inbox right then. D. Caldwell. The connection arrived in his chest as a physical event, a cold collapsing sensation, as though something structural had given way. The color went out of his face from the top down, forehead first, then cheeks, then jaw, leaving him the pale yellow of old paper. His mouth fell open. His hands, which had been laced casually behind his head, came down to his thighs and stayed there with the quality of things that had lost their purpose. His legs went flat on the floor. Something that had been solid in his chest for many years was now liquid, and he could feel it spreading. He had signed his name to that report, his own signature. He had written the charges himself, official misconduct, possession with intent, and driven her there and locked the door. He had put his new commanding officer in a cell in her own precinct, framed her in writing with his own hand, and gone home to shower and come back to tell the story. In the fourth row, Sawyer Briggs's pen hit the linoleum. The clean, small sound of it carried in the silence, and every head in the briefing room turned for a half-second toward where it had come from. Briggs did not move. He sat with his mouth open and his face the color of ash, and the pen on the floor between his feet, and he was not breathing. He had understood what was happening the moment Grant said the name, because he had spent the last hours staring at a blank screen with that name on the arrest form he had watched Pruitt write. Sergeant Beckett walked up the aisle. He walked the way a man walks when he has just understood the full weight of a choice he made hours ago in the ordinary course of a shift he thought was unremarkable. His hands were shaking. Not dramatically, but visibly. The fine tremor of someone who has gotten very cold, very quickly. The clipboard rapped against his leg with every step, and he could not stop it. He stopped in front of the podium. "Deputy Chief." His voice came out smaller than it was supposed to. "Sir, I think I know where the captain is." He extended the clipboard. Grant took it. He adjusted his reading glasses. He read the top page. The briefing room, which had been quiet, became something beyond quiet. You could hear the fluorescent ballasts in the ceiling. You could hear the building settling in the cold. What you could not hear was anyone breathing. Grant's expression traveled over several seconds through mild professional irritation, blank disbelief, and arrived at something that was not an expression so much as a weather front. His jaw set. A vein at his temple moved once. He lowered the clipboard. He lifted his eyes. They found Pruitt in the second row with the precision of a laser. "Officer Pruitt." A whisper. It was worse than shouting. "Yes, sir." "Did you make a narcotics arrest last night?" "Keller and Monroe. One Nora Caldwell." Pruitt's voice reached for its usual authority and produced something 3 registers below it. "Yes, Deputy Chief. Routine traffic stop. Controlled substance possession." "And before you booked this individual, did you run her prints? Access the Bureau personnel database. Check whether a Captain Nora Caldwell was currently assigned to command this precinct." Silence. "Did you, sir?" "That's not standard procedure for a stop, sir." The voice did not rise. It did something more effective than rising. "You did not arrest a drug dealer last night. You arrested your new commanding officer, who has been sitting in holding cell 4 of this precinct for several hours." The briefing room made a sound. Not words, the sound the officers make when they all inhale simultaneously, and not one of them exhales. A coffee cup tipped in the third row. A rookie near the back said something he did not mean to say aloud, and said it anyway. Somewhere to Pruitt's left, someone laughed a single broken note of sheer disbelief, the kind that escapes before a person has decided whether what they just heard is real. Pruitt's face did what faces rarely do. It changed completely in visible layers over several seconds in front of the officers. The color, the posture, the specific quality of a man who had built many years on the bedrock certainty that he could not be reached, watching that certainty dissolve into something for which he did not have a word. "That's not possible." Grant did not answer him. She was in a hoodie. She was driving a rental. She didn't identify herself. She was not required to identify herself as a force to avoid being framed by her own officers. He turned to Lieutenant Granger. "Get the keys to cell 4 now." Granger moved faster than the room had ever seen her move. She left through the front door at nearly a run. "Get up, Officer Pruitt. You're walking with me." Pruitt got up. He had to hold the back of the chair in front of him for a moment, while his legs made their decision. Grant watched him do it, and did not help him. Sawyer Briggs stood up without being told. He moved into the aisle. He looked at Grant, then at the corridor that led to the holding cells, and the last several weeks of everything he had seen and not reported were running through his head in a single fast pass, and he had already decided what he was going to do about all of it. They walked. The corridor from this briefing room to the holding cells was waxed linoleum and institutional green. Grant led. Granger came behind him with the keyring. Beckett followed with the clipboard, eyes on the floor. Behind them, Pruitt. He walked the way a man walks when every step requires a separate decision, and the decisions keep arriving late. Each one slower than the last, each one carrying him towards something he could not reverse. Behind Pruitt, quietly, with his hands loose at his sides and his face set with the particular resolution of someone who has just done the math and accepted the answer, came Briggs. Pruitt's mind ran the sequence on a loop. The nameplate, the report, the several previous times, several previous people who had played out exactly as he'd calculated. The voice that had told him each time that the math was in his favor. That voice had been the foundation of many years of decisions he had never examined, because examining them would have required him to name what they were. And naming them Standing in this corridor in front of this door meant standing exactly where he was standing now, with the officers back in that briefing room, and a federal deputy chief a few feet ahead of him, and his own signature on a piece of paper that was sitting in his commanding officer's inbox. He had been completely wrong. Not about procedure, not about paperwork, but about the fundamental premise that had run beneath every decision he had ever made in that vest. He had seen what he expected to see, and never once considered that the calculation might fail, because it had never failed before. And the reason it had never failed before was not that his instincts were sound. It was that the people he had chosen had no way to fight back. This time he had chosen wrong, and the distance between wrong and catastrophic in his case was the length of this corridor. At the door of cell 4, Granger got the key in the lock. The tumblers fell. The door groaned open. Nora Caldwell was sitting on the metal bunk exactly where she had been. She stood in one smooth motion, not like someone rising from a jail cell, but like someone rising from a chair at the start of a meeting they have been preparing for. She adjusted the cuffs of the gray hoodie. She ran one hand through her hair. Then she stepped out of the cell. She looked at Grant. "Deputy Chief, I apologize for missing the briefing. I was unavoidably detained." Something moved behind Grant's eyes that had the quality of a man watching something survive against considerable odds, against all reasonable probability, intact. Captain, on behalf of the—" "Let's not do that yet, Elias." "Yes, ma'am." She looked past him, past Granger, past Beckett. Her eyes found Pruitt and stayed there. She did not speak. She held the look for several full seconds in which the corridor held its breath, and every officer within earshot went absolutely still, and what her face communicated in those seconds was not anger, not triumph, not the satisfaction of vindication. It was something more considered than any of those things. It was the expression of a woman who had been waiting in a professional sense across many years for exactly this moment, and who had nothing left to prove and everything left to do. Pruitt could not hold it. He looked at the floor. It was the first time in many years that he had looked at the floor in front of another officer. Nora turned to Grant. "My personal effects, my shield, my weapon, my phone. Yes, Captain. And I want every officer in this precinct in the bullpen in 10 minutes. No one leaves the building." She walked past them into the corridor without touching any of them. Every officer she passed stepped to the side without being told, because some authorities are conferred by rank, and some are established by something that cannot be issued or revoked. And the woman in the gray hoodie walking out of cell 4 carried both behind her. Briggs finally spoke, quietly enough that only Pruitt heard it. "She told you, Vance." Pruitt didn't answer. "She told you at the cell door to call a union rep. She knew. She knew the whole time." Pruitt stared at the concrete bench where his commanding officer had been sitting. He did not answer, because he had nothing left to say that would change any of it. The officers stood at their desks in the Harrow District bullpen. They stood without being ordered to, because when a woman who has spent hours in a holding cell walks into a room as the commanding officer of that room, nobody has to tell you to stand. Nora walked to the front. She had not changed her clothes. The gray hoodie was the same one she had worn to a pharmacy she never reached. The jeans were the same. Her shoes were the same. The only things different were the silver shield on her belt, retrieved from the property locker with her phone and her service weapon, and the folded square of paper she was carrying loosely in her left hand. She turned and faced the room. She let it look at her for a moment, without filling the silence. She had learned a long time ago that silence before a difficult thing was not wasted time. It was preparation. "My name is Captain Nora Caldwell. As of this morning, I am the commanding officer of the Harrow District PD. That is my name on the door at the end of this hallway." She paused. "When I accepted command of this precinct, I was briefed by the State Police Bureau and by this department's Internal Affairs Division on the Harrow District's reputation. I was told there was a culture in this building, a culture in which certain officers had come to believe that the uniform was a personal license rather than a public trust. I was told I should expect resistance. I was told the blue wall would be high and the information would be slow, and that if I wanted to understand what my precinct actually looked like, I would have to see it for myself. She stopped. She looked at the room. So, I arrived in Harrove a day early. I spent the day unpacking my apartment. Last night, I left my residence to purchase over-the-counter medication at a 24-hour pharmacy on the edge of this precinct's patrol sector. I was driving a vehicle leased through the Bureau's undercover fleet. I was wearing what I'm wearing now. I was alone. Sla. She lifted the folded paper. At the intersection of Keller Avenue and Monroe Street, I was stopped by Officer Vance Pruitt, badge number 147 of this precinct, riding with Officer Sawyer Briggs, badge number 2034, a rookie under Officer Pruitt's training supervision. Officer Pruitt cited me for a traffic violation, a swerve across the center line that did not occur. When I provided all requested documentation and cooperated fully, Officer Pruitt claimed to detect the odor of marijuana. That substance was not present in my vehicle or anywhere in its vicinity. He ordered me to exit the car. He conducted a search that yielded nothing, no contraband of any kind. At that point, Officer Pruitt reached into the interior pocket of his tactical vest, removed a small sealed bag of a white powdery substance, entered the driver's compartment of my vehicle, placed the bag on the floorboard, and then, in a performance for his partner's benefit, retrieved it and announced that he had found it. She let that land. She let the room stay with it. He then drove me to this building. He walked me through this booking room. He placed his hand on the back of my neck and pushed me through the door of cell 4 with more force than any procedure allows. When I stumbled, he laughed. And when he closed that door, he told me. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was very precise, that there was no difference between me and every other person he had ever put in that cell, that we all looked the same from where he was standing, that we always had. The room did not move. I want every officer in this building to sit with what that sentence tells you about every arrest this officer ever made, every report he ever filed, every person he processed through this precinct over many years, from the vantage point of someone who had already decided we were all the same. She unfolded the paper in her hand. This is the report Officer Pruitt filed early this morning. It was in my inbox when I arrived at this building. It describes a swerve that did not happen, an odor that did not exist, a search conducted without legal basis, and a discovery that was manufactured in its entirety by his own hand in a vehicle he did not know was equipped with a 360-degree recording system, uploading in real time to a secure state server. She walked to the wall monitor. She pointed the remote. What you are about to watch is footage from the interior camera of the Bureau vehicle I was driving last night. Officer Pruitt was not aware of this system. Officer Briggs was not aware of it. No one in this building was aware of it. The monitor came to life. What the room saw in the next moments was, by unanimous agreement afterward, the worst police footage any officer in the Harrove district had ever watched. Not because of its violence, but because of its clarity. Wide angle and tight angle simultaneously, night vision clean, audio pristine, no ambiguity, no shadow, no possible reading other than the one it presented, the vest pocket, the hand, the bag, the floorboard, the retrieval. Pruitt's face in profile as he stood holding the bag and the maglite beam, with the grin that had not yet arrived, but was already forming. Nora paused the footage on the exact frame where the bag left Pruitt's fingers above the floorboard. There, she turned off the monitor. She turned back to the room. Official misconduct, deprivation of rights under color of law, fabrication of physical evidence, perjury. She named each charge the way a physician names a diagnosis, with precision, without drama, and without the possibility of misunderstanding. Those are 4 federal charges. A 5th will be filed before the indictment is complete. Conspiracy, if anyone in the chain of custody assisted Officer Pruitt in processing a fraudulent arrest and knows it. Her eyes moved to Sergeant Beckett standing near the rear wall. The look held one beat long enough to be understood by Beckett and by every officer who saw it. Then her eyes moved forward. They found the fourth row. "Officer Briggs." Briggs' voice was barely audible from where he stood. "Yes, Captain." "You were present for the entirety of the stop on Keller Avenue last night. You were standing a few feet from Officer Pruitt at the critical moment. I know what the footage shows. I'm giving you one opportunity in front of every officer in this building to tell me what you saw with your own eyes." The room shifted. Not physically. No one moved. But something in its quality shifted the way a room shifts when it understands that what is about to happen cannot be taken back. In the third row, Pruitt turned his head toward Briggs. His eyes were doing the thing that a man's eyes do when he has nothing left to negotiate with, but the fear he can still put in someone else. Many years of shared shifts, every meal eaten in the same cruiser, every call backed, every look exchanged across a booking room, the entire accumulated architecture of the blue wall brought to bear in a single stare. "Do not do this to me." Briggs looked at him. He looked at the monitor. He looked at the captain. He looked down at his own boots. Then he looked up. And several weeks of watching and saying nothing went through his head in a single fast and bitter pass, and on the other side of it was something clear. "I saw Officer Pruitt plant the narcotics, Captain." His voice shook on the first word. Every word after that was steady. There was no swerve. There was no marijuana odor. The search was conducted without cause. He removed the bag from the interior pocket of his tactical vest. I was a few feet away. I watched him set it on the floorboard and retrieve it. A breath. I wanted on the record that during several weeks of training under Officer Pruitt, I was told on separate occasions that the inside pocket was there in case a stop didn't produce what it was supposed to produce. I didn't report it. I am reporting it now, and I will testify to every word of it under oath. The wall broke. You could almost hear it. Years of precinct tradition, many years of Vance Pruitt's personal arrangement with it, all of it going at once in a single statement delivered in a shaking voice by a young officer several months out of the academy. Pruitt came off the desk. He came off it the way a man comes off a desk, when the last thing he has left is his hands, and he came across the aisle toward Briggs, with his arms extended and something in his face that had abandoned all pretense of anything, except the animal desperation of a man who has just watched everything collapse and cannot find another response. He covered a couple steps. Several officers came from different angles simultaneously. They put him down on the linoleum hard, his shoulder catching a desk corner on the way, his face meeting the floor with a sound that carried to the back of the room. Someone got a knee in his back. Someone else had his left arm in a compliance hold. He struggled for a couple seconds and then stopped, because the floor was unambiguous and so was everything else. "Easy." Nora's voice was quiet and absolute. "Cuff him. Read him his rights." Briggs stepped forward. His hands, which had been shaking, were still. He took his own cuffs from his belt. He knelt beside the man who had spent several weeks teaching him every practice a police officer should never be, and he clicked the steel around Pruitt's wrists. Click, click. The same sound, the same cold metal that Pruitt had made hours earlier on a quiet street under a streetlight on a woman he had decided was nobody. Nora walked to where Pruitt was being lifted from the floor. She stopped in front of him. He was breathing in short, ragged pulls, the impact reddening his jaw, his uniform disordered in a way that would have been unthinkable to him that morning when he had pressed it. She looked at him in a way that was neither cruel nor gentle, the look of a person who has spent many years in a profession that requires her to see people clearly, without the distortion of either sympathy or contempt. "Officer Pruitt," quietly enough that the front rows could hear every word, "you locked me in that cell last night because you decided I was a nobody. You were right about one thing. I was not your captain yet when you put those cuffs on me. I was a woman with a headache going to buy ibuprofen, but I was your captain this morning, and the first official act I performed in this role was read your arrest report signed by you about me in my own precinct." She held his gaze for a moment. "I intend to make use of every line of it for every year of your sentence." She turned to Grant. "Elias, there is a federal convoy in the parking lot. DOJ Civil Rights Division and several FBI agents from the Columbus field office. I placed the call from Cell 4 after the state server confirmed the footage upload, and I had documented grounds for federal intervention. They have a warrant for Officer Pruitt. They also have a subpoena for his locker, his cruiser, his personal phone, and his desktop terminal." Grant's face did not move, but something shifted behind it. "They pulled in earlier. They've been waiting very politely." A pause. "Federal investigators don't mind waiting. They get paid for it." As if the building had been listening for a cue, the bullpen doors at the back of the room opened. Several people in charcoal suits walked through in a line. DOJ Civil Rights Division credentials visible on lanyards, movements precise and without haste. They moved to positions at every exit and stood there without a word, and the room watched them do it, in the particular silence that follows an event that has already happened and cannot be undone. The lead agent placed the federal arrest warrant on the booking counter, signed by a U.S. magistrate in Columbus, bypassing local courts and local jurisdiction entirely, bearing the name Vance Allen Pruitt. On the wall monitor returned to local news at some point during the speech, a morning anchor was reading a headline beneath a chyron. Nobody in the room had noticed yet. When the nearest officer finally looked up and read it, he said nothing for a moment. Then he turned it toward the officer next to him without speaking. Breaking. Viral footage raises civil rights questions over Harrow District traffic stop. Federal investigation confirmed. In the lower corner of the screen, Gil Baxter's phone footage was playing on a loop. 6 months later, the United States District Court for the Southern District of Ohio called the case of the United States of America versus Vance Allen Pruitt. The trial ran several days. Pruitt arrived each morning in a gray suit that had not fit him properly since the first week of the federal detention center where he'd been held without bail. He had lost weight. The weight loss had taken something essential from his physical presence, the occupying the room quality that had characterized many years of overnight shifts, the sheer density of a man who had always used his size as a preliminary communication. Without it, he looked like what he was, a middle-aged man in a courtroom. With a very clear surveillance recording playing at full resolution in front of 12 jurors, the prosecution built the case with the patience and precision of people who did not need to reach for anything, because everything they needed was already there. The rental car footage was Exhibit A. A forensic analyst from the Bureau's technical division testified for hours about the camera's field of view, the resolution, the chain of digital custody from the moment of recording to the courtroom monitor. The defense moved twice to suppress and was denied both times, the court finding the recording legal, the custody chain unbroken, and the content unchallengeable. Gil Baxter testified. He wore his good jacket. He answered every question from both sides with the methodical precision of a man who had spent many years as a school bus driver and was constitutionally incapable of imprecision when facts mattered. His footage, the vest pocket, the hand, the bag, was played alongside the rental car footage in simultaneous display on 2 screens, 2 angles of the same seconds. The combined effect on the jury was visible. The government's star witness was Sawyer Briggs. He had been granted use immunity in exchange for full cooperation, and his testimony ran for hours. He did not look at Pruitt once during the entire course of it. He described the weeks of training, the criteria by which certain drivers became targets, the manufactured pretext, the vest pocket and its contents, the conversations in which Pruitt had explained the pocket's purpose. He described the stop on Keller Avenue from the moment the rental plates rolled past the service lane to the moment Briggs had heard a silver shield clip onto a belt in the property room the following morning. He described what he saw, what he failed to report, and why. The defense cross-examined him and accomplished nothing. The rental car footage was played for the jury uncut at full resolution, with the audio at the volume the courtroom system allowed. One juror put her hand over her mouth at the frame where the bag left the pocket. A second juror closed his eyes and kept them closed for the remainder of the clip. A third wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. The jury deliberated for some time. They returned guilty verdicts on all 4 federal counts. The sentencing hearing weeks later was presided over by a federal judge with many years on the bench and a record in civil rights prosecutions that the legal community in the Southern District knew well. She did not hold back. She told Pruitt she had read every complaint in his personnel file and the outcomes of several previous arrests that bore his method signature. She told him she had read the testimony of the 6 individuals whose convictions were being vacated as a result of this case. 3 men and 3 women, all of them black or Latino, none with prior criminal records, whose lives had been materially damaged by evidence he had planted and reports he had signed. She sentenced him to over a decade in federal custody. No parole for the first several years. His law enforcement certification was revoked permanently. His right to carry a firearm legally was revoked for life. His municipal pension was stripped entirely. The liquidated funds divided as court-ordered restitution among the 6 individuals whose convictions were being vacated. People who had sat in cell 4 and cells like it without a silver shield in their wallet, and without anyone until now to read the report and name what it was. When the gavel came down, Pruitt stood at the defense table with his lawyer's hand on his elbow. His wife was not in the gallery. His union representative was not in the gallery. Briggs was not in the gallery. Briggs was on patrol that morning in a new cruiser with a new training officer, running a stop on Keller Avenue with his body camera on, and his name check complete before he reached the driver's window. Nora was in the second row in uniform, her silver shield on her belt. She did not smile when the sentence was read. She did not look at Pruitt. She looked at the judge and gave one small, precise nod, one professional acknowledging another across the work they had both come to do. Then she stood up and walked out of the courtroom and went back to work. Beckett pleaded guilty to obstruction and falsification of government records, several years in minimum security, his pension stripped. He had spent many years at a booking desk, and the accumulated weight of every time he had typed a charge, he suspected was manufactured and filed the paperwork anyway, had finally resolved into a number with a courtroom behind it. 2 other Harrow District officers, faced with their own federal subpoenas, cooperated fully. Their testimony mapped a pattern of stops conducted with rotating partners, targets chosen by the same criteria Pruitt had used on Keller Avenue, evidence manufactured in the same inside pocket that the precinct's own complaint process had never assembled into a complete picture. Because each individual complaint had been too small, the targets too isolated, the outcomes too predictable. The 6 people previously framed had their convictions vacated. 3 accepted civil settlements from the city. The other 3 chose to have their stories heard publicly, which they did in a series of interviews that ran in newspapers and a national magazine, and which described in plain language what it felt like to sit in a cell in that building and know that what had been done to you was a lie and have no way to prove it. Briggs received a formal commendation from the State Bureau. A year later, he was promoted to senior officer and assigned as a field training officer, the youngest in Harrow District's history. On his first day with his own rookie, he sat in the cruiser before shift and said 3 sentences. The camera is always on. The report is always read. The person in that car has the same rights you do, and your job is to act like you believe that. Then he started the engine, and they went to work. 1 year after the stop on Keller Avenue, the Harrow District briefing room looked almost exactly the same. The cinder block walls were still that particular shade of institutional green that no one could date. The folding chairs were the same. The coffee station still needed cleaning more often than it received it. Above the podium, one thing had changed. A single frame notice, plain black type on white paper, no larger than a standard sheet. The Caldwell Protocol. Every stop recorded, every search logged, every complaint reviewed by an independent civilian board, Harrow District PD. Nobody argued about it anymore, not because they had been ordered not to, but because months of living inside it had shown enough of them, enough about the difference between what the precinct had been and what it was becoming. Nora stood at the podium on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, same time of year, same edge of cold in the air outside, and the officers sat in the chairs in front of her and paid attention in a way that officers at Harrow District had never paid attention to anything before she arrived. Not because they feared her, but because over many long months they had come to understand what she was building, and enough of them had decided individually and without being told that they wanted to be part of it. At the back of the room, Sawyer Briggs, Sergeant Stripes newly pressed on his sleeve, poured a cup of coffee, looked up across the room, caught her eye, and gave one small, steady nod. She nodded back, the smallest nod in the world, and turned to the morning briefing and began it the way she began every morning, with the overnight reports, the names of every person her officers had encountered, and the standard by which those encounters would be handled in this precinct. In a federal correctional facility in eastern Ohio, a man in a tan jumpsuit pushed a mop across a concrete floor in the protective segregation unit. He did not speak to the other inmates. The other inmates did not speak to him. He had lost weight. His hair had gone mostly white in the first months. On the wall of the common room, a small television was playing the morning news on mute, and he no longer looked at it. The streets of Harrow's east side were not without crime. Crime does not disappear because one man goes to prison. But on the east side of that city, in the precinct that had been broken for many years, the contract between the badge and the people it was supposed to serve had been put back together. It would be tested again. All contracts are. But it would not be broken by Vance Pruitt, and it would not be broken easily. And in the neighborhoods where his cruiser had patrolled for many years, where people had learned the particular vigilance of those who have reason to watch their rearview mirror, something was slowly, provisionally, and with appropriate caution beginning to change. A badge is a contract, not a crown, not a license, not a vantage point from which all targets look the same. In the Harrow District precinct on the east side of a city that most of the country had never heard of, the contract was holding. If this story moved you, if you believe that accountability belongs to everyone who wears the badge and everyone who doesn't, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next one. Because the next Nora Caldwell is out there right now, quietly in a gray hoodie on her way to a pharmacy, and the next Vance Pruitt is about to make the last mistake of his career.